Coming up, Alabama coach Nick Saban takes a weird step into politics, and did Georgia quarterback Stetson Bennett have a misstep with some post-game comments after the national championship? We'll talk about it all next, right here today on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to SEC Country Live. I am Brandon Adams. Happy to have you back here with us again. It feels like it's been a little while since we've done the show, but nonetheless, I'm glad to. Maybe we were here last week. Honestly, I can't remember. Either way, it is good to be with you. Big stuff coming up for this show in the brand new year. A lot of that coming up today as we talk about a lot of the comings and goings around the world of the SEC as the pieces getting put in place for a big year here in 2022 for the league's teams. For us here on this show, we are going to cover all of that. Some of what that includes, before we're done today, we're going to talk about some of the league's newer coaches, first-year guys that made an impact on this league and what they have a chance to do as you start looking ahead next season, maybe bringing about some balance between the SEC East, the SEC West. We'll certainly talk about that. An interesting quarterback race in one of the SEC West schools. We'll talk about that before we're all said and done. But I want to begin with this, if you don't mind. Alabama coach Nick Saban has always been the kind of person that over the course of years has chosen his words very carefully and for the most part seems to sidestep anything that could be deemed controversial and anything that could be a potential distraction for his football team. It's the kind of thing that he's sort of made famous, process-oriented the way that he is. In fact, if you want an example of this, let's go way back to the year of 2016 after the presidential election. Nick Saban was asked to weigh in on that, and at the time, Nick Saban made it very clear that that's not the kind of thing he felt like as the coach of Alabama football he should be sharing any kind of opinion about whatsoever. This is Nick Saban from 2016.
Yesterday's presidential election, and secondly, do you feel like it's best for active coaches to avoid political talk publicly?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't even know yesterday was election day. So it was so important to me that I didn't even know it was happening. We're focused on other things here. I don't really make political comments. So if I say I like one person, that means that everybody that voted for the other person doesn't like me. So why would I do that? I want what's best for our country. I'm not sure I can figure that out. I want what's best for, people who want to improve the quality of their life. And I hope whoever our leader is will certainly do all that he can do to make our country safe and improve the quality of life of a lot of the people, that we have in our country. And I don't think I'm qualified to determine, who that should be.
So Saban was probably exaggerating at the time when he said he didn't even know that it was presidential election day. That seems hard to believe. But there's also kind of a certain level of humility in Saban's words there, which is, hey, I think the problems of our country may be bigger than what I need to be weighing in on. I've got my own job here coaching Alabama football, and maybe I should stay focused on that and let the folks who want to do the other stuff for a living, politics, kind of figure the other stuff out. He literally, in that particular case, seemed to want to stick to sports. And listen, politics is kind of a thorny issue. Different people have, different opinions on both sides, and Saban seems to say there of, think what you want about politics, but I'm going to do the work of taking care of my football team. And in terms of doing the job that he's paid handsomely to do, that to me seems like a pretty good attitude about this kind of thing. And yet when you look at how Nick Saban has apparently evolved since 2016, all of a sudden now that attitude for Nick Saban doesn't quite seem so in fashion for him anymore. And to me, frankly, I find this to be a little bit surprising because this week it's been reported by a number of outlets that Nick Saban has weighed in on election law issue facing the United States Senate. He's obviously from the state of West Virginia. He has apparently been a part of a letter to West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Let me show you this on the screen. This is coming from Yahoo Sports on the idea that Saban, along with Paul Tagliabue and and others, Jerry West, are kind of joining in on this letter about, basically the Manchin. So what Yahoo Sports is that Saban, Jerry West, among 5 signers of a letter pushing West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin to support the Senate's voting rights bill. Saban and West endorsed Manchin's 2018 re-election bid. That's kind of the deal there. You maybe have seen the letter on that. Then there was Caitlin Collins from the Washington Post. I'll show you this there as well. Who apparently Saban had kind of negotiated for there to be a little bit of a footnote to his bill. That Caitlin Collins writes that on the voting rights letter to Manchin that Saban and other West Virginia sports figures signed, I'm told that he asked to include this footnote. Coach Saban is not in favor of getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate. He believes this will destroy the checks and balances, blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing just seems sort of weird. And listen, it's an important issue, and having an opinion on that probably matters. Expressing that opinion on a show like SEC Country Live wouldn't really be appropriate, not for me to do, and not necessarily for me to amplify your opinion there as well. There are all kinds of shows out there to go to and be a part of if you want to share your thoughts on, the U.S. government federalizing elections and essentially taking over local elections. You have every opportunity to kind of weigh in on that topic somewhere else. The question here is whether or not Nick Saban needs to be weighing in on this topic right now, what this does potentially to Alabama football. And to me, I think this potentially opens up a treasure trove of problems for Saban as the coach of Alabama. I mean, have you ever heard it kind of said that, when you're on the witness stand and let's say you plead the fifth, you have a right not to incriminate yourself. You plead the fifth, it means that you take advantage of the opportunity not to answer certain questions. But once you answer any question, then all questions become available to you again. You can no longer plead the fifth anymore once you have chosen not to plead the fifth in one particular, aspect of the question you might be receiving. And I think that there's a certain aspect of this when it comes to politics there as well. That as long as Saban takes sort of a blanket statement rejecting any kind of involvement in politics, then the media that would want to question him on stuff like this and get an interesting quote and kind of stir up trouble, then all of a sudden they're going to be thwarted because Nick Saban has kind of kept sort of a blanket policy in place of never talking about these things. But once you kind of pick and choose which things you do talk about, which things you don't talk about, your opinion about the filibuster, your opinion about voting law, your opinion about all that kind of stuff, then all of a sudden the inquisitive media are going to now be curious of what your political opinions are on any number of subjects. And Nick Saban, for the most part, who's kept these kinds of things outside of his press conferences, I don't know that in the future he's going to find this quite as easy to do anymore now that he's shown a willingness to engage on these kind of political topics. I mean, there are plenty of coaches who talk about politics all the time in their post-game press conferences. NBA coaches like Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich and others. And there are other folks around the world of sports who are kind of ask political questions all the time, whether they want to be or not. And I think now Nick Saban has kind of moved himself into the kind of world in which he's going to now become one of those guys where, hey, Nick Saban, did you hear about this? What's your opinion on that? You've weighed in on politics before. Do you have an opinion on this? And as long as you're the kind of guy that rejects all of that, then it becomes very easy to kind of ignore political questions. But once you've kind of introduced yourself as a political figure, and in this particular case, that's exactly what Nick Saban has done, and all of a sudden now more potentially distracting political questions will now come his way during press conferences. As I said before, you can feel however you want to about any political issue. Frankly, I really don't care, nor do I care enough to tell you about how I feel about any political issue. But on the field as a football coach, a coach engaging this way politically seems to be a little bit of a mistake. And for me, it seems to be a little bit of a continuation of what is for Nick Saban kind of a difficult time kind of figuring out of how he fits into the current landscape as 2021 turns into 2022. He's expressed some concern about name, image, likeness stuff. He's talked about this offensive revolution that has rendered running the football and playing defense essentially irrelevant, and yet ultimately he lost the national championship game this year because of the fact that Georgia played better defense, ran the football better than his team was able to do. Nick Saban, at this late stage of his career, seems to be having a hard time kind of figuring out where he fits into all of this, and I think this ham-handed attempt to engage in politics is maybe another example of that. We'll take your comments on this coming up in a moment here on SEC Country Live, of course on Facebook, SEC Country, on YouTube, SEC Country Live on YouTube. We'll look forward to taking your comments on that topic here coming up in a moment. Before we get to that, though, one more issue involving the Alabama Crimson Tide, and I find this to be a little bit interesting. There has been some chatter out there as of late that Alabama, on the heels of losing the national championship game, might also be in jeopardy of losing its offensive coordinator. At one point in time, it was rumored that Bill O'Brien, former Houston Texans head coach, could be on his way back to the AFC South as the potential head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Suddenly, though, all of that seems to be called into question, and maybe there's a little bit of a pumping of the brakes of the idea that Jacksonville might be interested in O'Brien as a permanent replacement for Urban Meyer there with the Jaguars and a chance to work with what is soon to be second-year quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Let me get you Mike Garofalo here from the NFL Network earlier this week saying that in retrospect, actually, as Jacksonville goes through its process of looking for a head coach, apparently O'Brien got the interview, but there might not be more to this than just that. This is Garofalo from the NFL Network from earlier this week.
Candidates for the Jaguars job. He did interview. The Jaguars right now are in between phase 1 and phase 2 of their coaching search, meaning they had their first round of interviews. Now it's like, okay, who are we going to bring back? Who's going to be our finalist here? I'm just not getting the vibe that it's going to be Bill O'Brien. Now, I can't say that conclusively, but having spoken to sources with some knowledge of the search and how this is going and who's being sized up as a potential favorite, I'm not getting that vibe that Bill O'Brien is going to be the guy that's going to be in the lead here. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, that's Trent Baalke's guy. He's running the search here. I'm just not getting that vibe. Bill O'Brien one day may be back in the NFL as a head coach or offensive coordinator. I don't believe it's going to be with the Jaguars, at least not this go-around right here.
So in normal situations like this, when an NFL Network analyst or NFL.com writer were to go on TV and saying, hey, the Alabama offensive coordinator is actually not taking the Jacksonville Jaguars head coaching job, in most cases, this would actually be greeted as pretty good news in most circles, in most situations. However, with Alabama fans right now, I'm actually not quite so sure that's true, that O'Brien faced pretty heavy criticism after the national championship game loss to Georgia, a game in which Alabama had struggled scoring any touchdowns, the only touchdown of the game for the Crimson Tide coming on a relatively short field. And then a lot of that criticism of O'Brien even predating that. You want to go back to November for a moment. After the Alabama offense scuffled in a win against LSU, on his coaching show the following week, Nick Saban kind of found himself in the position of having to try to defend O'Brien when a question came up from a fan about why O'Brien coached, on the field or the coaching booth, how it was that he makes the choice that he makes on that. Nick Saban felt the need to kind of offer up a little bit of a defense of O'Brien at the time on the heels of what had been a pretty rough offensive output against LSU. I don't have audio of this, but I will show you the quote from Nick Saban on the screen here for a moment. Saban going back to his radio show in November on the subject of Bill O'Brien saying, I actually think he's done a pretty good job. I think we all had a bad game last week. That was the win against LSU. O'Brien will be the first to say that, Saban said, but I don't think that's a reason to question what we've done all year. We are the number one scoring team in the SEC. That was true then, still true as the season comes to an end, but maybe not the best offensive performance when it mattered most in that national championship game against Georgia. So you're kind of left to wonder here if you're an Alabama fan, especially with rumors of, well, if O'Brien were to leave, someone like Adam Gase, who's got a respected resume, that might be the potential replacement for O'Brien. Do Alabama fans even still want Bill O'Brien as offensive coordinator? On the one hand, the numbers were, for the most part, really good. Obviously, Bryce Young had a Heisman Trophy winning season. Jamison Williams had a big year at the receiver spot for you there as well. But ultimately, there were some moments this year where O'Brien seemed to make some head-scratching decisions, and clearly the productivity wasn't enough to get it done in the national championship game against Georgia. So I'm very curious from Alabama fans on a couple of notes here today. How do you feel about your head coach, Nick Saban, getting involved in politics? And how do you feel about the future of your offense and whether or not you still want Bill O'Brien to be a part of that in 2022, with O'Brien being rumored for other jobs and now maybe falling just short of getting the chance to truly become Jacksonville Jaguars head coach? We'll talk about all of that and get into some situations involving some of the league's other teams, including the Georgia Bulldogs here in just a moment. By the way, speaking of the Dogs, I do have my national championship scarf on right now. I've pretty much been wearing this ever since Georgia won the title a couple of Mondays ago. But nonetheless, before we kind of move on and get into some other stuff related to today, let's also give you a chance to kind of weigh in right now on all of that. So let's find out what people are saying there on Facebook. Nick Phillips says Saban needs to worry about football, not politics. David Martin says he thinks that Saban needs to go into politics. And listen, I think that Nick Saban's a respected leader, and obviously I think that his opinions on a number of things, at least in terms of how to be the best version of yourself and make the football team the best you can possibly be, he's clearly shown some real capabilities along those lines. But politics is one of those things that's so hot button, that's so intense, that it's almost best not to even wade into those waters at all unless you want to be a permanent part of that. Because once you become kind of tarred as pro this or anti that, it's very hard to shake that off. People are just very entrenched in their political beliefs these days. And once you become the kind of person that's willing to sort of step up and be partisan on one issue or the other, one side or the other, folks don't forget that kind of stuff easily. And if you want your job as Alabama football coach to be distraction-free, steering clear of that to me seems like a pretty good idea. Philip Jordan Wells weighing in on the Bill O'Brien situation. Sandy Carlisle says that he can do both, and he may be physically capable of doing both, but are the people that invest their time and their love and Alabama football, what kind of tolerance are they going to have for that? And for Nick Saban, who maybe wants to tiptoe into this issue but then sort of walk away from all that and get back to the business of football, how willing is the media going to be to allow him to do that once they see this door open to have him talk more about politics? Trust me, once the media gets a little taste of that, they are not going to give up on that very soon. And for someone like Nick Saban, I don't know that he has much of a right to say, why are y'all asking me all these political questions, when he's the one that opened the door on that kind of stuff to begin with? Because you believe me when I tell you that more of that is probably coming. Danny Sanchez says it's a free speech situation, and clearly he's got the freedom to be able to do with that for sure there as well. There's also kind of an interesting debate going on in our Facebook comment section right now related to whether or not Alabama has justifiable excuses for why it lost to Georgia the other day. Clearly, a lot of Georgia fans aren't buying that in our Facebook comment section. It kind of reminds me of, I saw the meme, and I wish I could find this again because I thought it was really funny. You know the wall, I guess it's the Alabama locker room, that says no excuses? Somebody kind of marked out the no and put some excuses. It seems like there are some Alabama fans who are making some excuses for that loss to Georgia, maybe, just maybe. Let's see what else. Tyler Bending says that Saban should run for U.S. Senate. Maybe one day he will. At 70 years old, Saban's a lot younger than a lot of the folks in Washington, D.C. right now. So maybe he will do that. Let's see what else. By the way, Frederick Brown says, don't say Georgia was a better team. You want a lot of it today. Keyword injuries, I'm just saying. Man, it's a real shame. And listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a Georgia fan, of course. That's why I got the national championship scarf on. I have the SEC country colors underneath that, but the Georgia scarf is on. It's just a real shame to see a lot of these Alabama folks who can't accept the result of the game against Georgia. I mean, my gosh. I think that's just really tough to see. Obviously, Alabama, who has won a national championship because of a Colt McCoy injury, won 2 national championships after not even winning the SEC. All of a sudden, they've kind of found their way into a lot of national championships that maybe some folks in the past would have maybe said they didn't deserve. All of a sudden now having a hard time accepting the result of this game against Georgia a couple of weeks ago. It's really a tough thing to see for a fan base that's obviously had no share of success over the years. Let's get more comments here on Facebook here for a moment. Henry Blizzard says, you say what you want. Saban can too. Yeah, there's no doubt that Saban can say whatever he wants to say here. But here's the thing I know full well. That if I came on this show and expressed a political opinion, about half of you would agree with it and about half of you wouldn't. Now, I can't really afford to lose half my audience, so I'm never going to kind of get into that too much. But also, if I express an opinion and you hate it, then it's the kind of thing that I know that you are never going to forget about me. I'm always the kind of person that said blah, blah, blah about blah, blah, blah. And obviously, if you're Nick Saban, you're more successful than me. He's got championships. He's got millions of dollars. He's got things like that. So seemingly he has more to lose, but he's also got more to risk there as well, that once you kind of brand yourself as a political figure, it becomes very hard to walk that back. It becomes very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. At some point in time, Nick Saban is going to want to be just a football coach again. And I'm not quite so sure people who've kind of enjoyed the last couple of days of Saban weighing in on the filibuster and voting rights and things like that, federal takeover of elections. I'm not quite so sure that toothpaste is going to go back in the tube quite so easily there on that. Tony Taylor says we lost too many starters at the wrong time this year. Obviously referenced the Alabama thing there a little bit. Nick Phillips, though, says Georgia earned that championship. And it's really kind of funny, and we've been doing SEC Country Live now for a good number of years, and that tug-of-war back and forth between Georgia and Alabama has always been a big subtext of a lot of the comment section stuff that we've done around here. And all of a sudden now, Georgia fans who have taken a lot from Alabama fans over the years, all of a sudden now they find themselves on top in this argument. And I'm sure for a lot of them, it's kind of interesting to watch the way in which some of these Alabama fans are responding to all of that. Let's see what else. A lot of folks continue to kind of weigh in here on this. Kenneth Last says he thinks that Nick Saban's being dishonest, saying that he would sell his kids for another title, essentially saying that his political issue on this is just posturing to, benefit whatever, benefit, those who he wants to hear him saying this. And honestly, I can't read into his motives on this whatsoever. I just think there's no such thing as a free lunch. Shooting off at the hip about one particular issue only invites more attention for your opinion on other issues there as well. And I wonder how Nick Saban's going to find, how comfortable he's going to find that to be. Let's get what else. One more on this. Steve Jackson says, I lost all respect for Nick Saban. He owns a car dealership in a state that doesn't want. See, I can't get into the See, here's the thing is honestly, people have opinions on the actual issue at hand here, and I'm not going to get into that because, I just don't really want to make that a part of what we're doing around here. But you better believe that Steve, represents a lot of people who maybe have feelings about one thing or another, and all of a sudden now he kind of knows where Nick Saban kind of falls on that. And if you're an Alabama fan, that causes you kind of see Nick Saban maybe in a little bit different kind of way. Steve Highland also says that Bama's now a basketball school. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the Iron Bowl teams. Auburn's really good at basketball. Alabama has been now for a couple of years. Pretty funny stuff all the way around. We have not gotten YouTube comments yet. We'll get some more of those in a moment. Let me keep things rolling here for right now. And I want to talk about Georgia. Before I do, though, can I give a shout out to my friends at Merriweather and Tharp? Of course, you know them as your source for divorce around SEC country, based in Atlanta, but you do not have to be in Atlanta to take advantage of the great resources they provide. If you check them out online, theatlantadivorceteam.com, here's what you're going to find. Access to free blog posts, podcast, opportunity for an initial consultation with one of the Merriweather and Tharp attorneys. They are going to give you information you need about the divorce process. And I realize that is not a fun thing to talk about. As unfun as politics is as a topic for many people, the subject of divorce, even more unfun than that. But let's face it, it is a reality for many. And that means you want someone who understands that process to help educate you about it. That is where our friends at Merriweather and Tharp step in. TheAtlantaDivorceTeam.com is the website. They're your source for divorce around SEC country. So whether you join us from the Carolinas or Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, wherever else, you can get engaged on what you need to know if you believe divorce is the next step for you with our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Good, friendly folks who will listen to your story and obviously offer you some comfort on that, but also some very important education as well on what is next for you, how the law can work to your benefit, all of that online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. Find them out there. All right, speaking of Georgia, the reigning national champion, there's been kind of a weird thing going on as of late. We do this show at 3 p.m. Eastern time each and every day, and I try to be at my best, or I should say each and every Wednesday. I try to be at my best when we do this show. I want to be sharp. I want to be lucid if possible. Frankly, there are a lot of times in which maybe I'm probably not best suited to be on the air. Too early in the morning, too late at night, things like that. You maybe not get the best version of BA under those particular circumstances. Maybe that was also what happened to Georgia quarterback Stetson Bennett after the national championship win 2 Mondays ago, when the very next morning, very early in the AM, he had to make an appearance on Good Morning America. If I had to assume, I'm guessing this is some sort of contractual thing related to ESPN's relationship with ABC, that the winner of the game comes on the TV program. And for Stetson Bennett, the entire thing was just a little bit awkward. If you've seen the video, you see Stetson kind of staring off into the distance. He's clearly not slept very much. At one point in time in the interview, he even admitted that he hadn't slept very much. But also there was the point in the interview in which Michael Strahan, obviously former New York Giants Gray, asked Stetson about his plans for next year, having led Georgia to a national championship this year, kind of emerging as an unlikely story, former walk-on. Stetson was a little bit non-committal about where he's going to play football next season, but certainly intimating that he does plan on playing football somewhere next season. And the way in which Bennett said what he said has gotten some attention from some, I believe a little bit unfairly, but nonetheless, this is Stetson Bennett from Good Morning America the morning after Georgia had won the national championship.
I'm going to play football this next year. We'll see where. We'll see if I can, trust the decisions that are made by, the staff, and see where I'm going to play. But right now, I'm enjoying this national championship, and the next part, who knows.
So that's Stetson Bennett saying there that, he wants to trust the coaches, whatever else, and it's a little bit awkwardly worded, and who really knows what Stetson meant by any of that? The one thing I think you can point out is Bennett had a chance to speak to reporters a couple of hours after the Good Morning America interview, and he didn't really amplify those comments in the same kind of way, which leads you to wonder, does he misspeak then in the Good Morning America interview? Either way, he said what he said, and it kind of got some attention, and it's even kind of gotten a little bit of criticism here for the fact that Bennett had to kind of question about what his football future held after the national championship on Monday. You may remember a sports show from like the 80s and 90s called The Sports Reporters on ESPN. Apparently it still exists as a podcast. And one of the guys that's been on that show, Mitch Albom, you know him as a guy who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie and some famous books. I guess was also at one time accused of plagiarism at the Detroit Free Press. But nonetheless, that's a different topic for a different day. The point here is that Albom on the Sports Reporters podcast really laid in pretty heavily on Stetson Bennett for the way in which Bennett spoke in the Good Morning America interview you just heard. Let me give you Stetson Bennett's criticism on behalf of Mitch Albom here. All of this I find to be a little bit weird, but this is Mitch Albom.
Everyone agreed that Stetson Bennett was a great college football story, but somebody forgot to give him the script. After he won the national championship with Georgia, he was interviewed on the field, where he seemed mostly dazed. The next day he was on Good Morning America, looking like he was about to pass out from partying. And later he said, when asked about next season, quote, "I'm going to play football this year. We'll see where. We will see if I can trust the decisions made by the staff." Whoa. Talk about failing the audition. This kid was set up to be the absolute darling of college football. Instead, after doing everything but mowing the lawn to get the job as Georgia's starting quarterback, he now has fans wondering if he'll bolt someplace else. Hey, Bennett's not obligated to do anything except play hard and try and win, which he did. But if his story was, as so many were saying, a Hollywood script, I think they're going to find someone else to play his part.
So a couple of things here just for a moment. First of all, comments like that from Mitch Albom are exactly why a show like SEC Country Live exists, because for such a long time, these big city, folks from way up north kind of showed over the course of time they had no willingness whatsoever to kind of talk about the kind of sports that Southerners like, college football included. If you go back and watch years and years and years worth of the Sports Reporters and ESPN back when that was a show, what you're going to find is guys like Albom and them never talked about college football at all. And now when they are sort of forced to, because now the internet has kind of democratized the sports world a bit, and all of a sudden now we see how popular college football really is, I think these guys sort of demonstrate themselves to be pretty ignorant of that particular subject. In this particular case, with Albom on Stetson Bennett, perfect example of that. He's criticizing the words of Bennett as if he thinks that Bennett's not sure he wants to come back to Georgia. But if anything, what Bennett is saying right there is, in the comments from Good Morning America you heard a moment ago, is he's not sure Georgia wants him to come back. And anybody who's in SEC country sort of understands that Bennett had to overcome a lot to even be Georgia quarterback, became starter in 2020, lost that job. In 2021, at the beginning of the season, was essentially given no chance to be the starting quarterback again before finally emerging as the guy who actually led Georgia to the national championship for the first time in 41 years. But even that accomplishment doesn't guarantee that Bennett gets to be the starting quarterback in 2022, and that is in all likelihood what Bennett's referencing there in the Good Morning America interview. But Mitch Albom doesn't know that because most of these guys have never covered a sporting event that took place south of Philadelphia, and that's just kind of the way all of that goes. But here's the other thing that I kind of find frustrating about the Mitch Albom stuff related to Stetson Bennett here. Can we give the guy a little bit of a break for seeming hungover on ABC television Tuesday morning after having not slept at all the night before? Now, Bennett never admits or acknowledges that he's drunk, but certainly he has openly admitted that he was not in the best state of mind after having slept so little the night after a game when having to get up and be on national television the next morning. In fact, he went on the Barstool Sports podcast, Pardon My Take, last week and tried to offer the best defense of himself that he could at the time. Here is Bennett with Big Cat and PFT commenter last week on Pardon My Take.
How drunk were you when you had to go on Good Morning America? That sucks so bad.
Yeah, well, the problem was, it wasn't like a Zoom call like this, so I couldn't see Michael and I couldn't see myself, so I had no idea what I was looking like. I was just talking to just a circular camera. So if I could have seen myself, I probably wouldn't have been leaning over to the side or I don't know. I probably could have done a better job. But I mean, I got out of the stadium at 2:30 in the morning. The interview was at 7:40 in the morning. It's tough after you win a national championship. This is a tough spot.
Yeah,
to be.
You're out there. This is like the best night of your life. You should be able to fully enjoy yourself. And anybody that shames you for being drunk or hungover the next day, that's just that person telling on themselves that they've never won a national championship. Because that's what you're supposed to do after the fact. If anything, they should either pay you money to do the interview, or you should just do the interview with somebody who's equally as drunk as you are, so that way nobody can point at you and be like, he's the bad guy. We're all in the same boat together. So I personally didn't have a problem with it.
It's tough when you do that interview. There's a difference between when Joe did it with you guys and me with the most professional morning show in America, Good Morning America. So, that was a tough spot. I got a few texts. My grandma called me over that one.
I mean, you guys are getting this guy in trouble with his grandma and everything else. And my only real take on all of this is that Bennett's coach, Kirby Smart, is notoriously famous for his hatred of the media. At least that certainly seems to be the case. I won't go so far as to say that he hates the media, but certainly he seems to want to avoid media engagements at all costs, and he wants to do so for his players. Kirby runs a very tight ship related to all of this, and when you hear the PMT guys right there trying to pin Bennett down and make him admit that he was drunk, or when you hear, Mitch Albom criticizing him because he wasn't the most articulate version of himself at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, honestly, it's hard not to kind of understand where Smart comes down on some of this kind of stuff. And, for those of us from a media standpoint who want to hear from more players around the SEC, or from a fan standpoint who want to hear the players' perspective so they have a better idea of what's actually going on around this league from a week-to-week basis, stuff like this, behavior that way from the media, especially from Mitch Albom, being that critical of a guy for an interview that he would rather not have even been doing, that he himself admitted he wasn't his best in, and yet someone like Albom, who ought to know better because gosh knows he's done this job for what seems like 65 years, the fact that he goes in that hard on Bennett, I think only is going to invite more coaches to be more restrictive with their media policy in the future. That most coaches would love to see their players avoid interviews at all costs. And when you see the way that some media members have behaved after Bennett's interview, I think it's sort of easy to understand why certain coaches feel that way. I'm Brandon Adams, this is SEC Country Live. Before we move on and do anything else, let me also remind you that while the college football season may have come to an end, don't forget there are still plenty of opportunities for you to get some action down on bets when it comes to the pro football playoffs. Now, admittedly, the wild card weekend wasn't all that much fun, a lot of blowouts, but as you head towards this weekend in the divisional round, the action just expects to be better. And whether the games are close or not, when you've got a bet down on the game, it's always going to be more fun to watch. So a lot of you watch the NFL closely. You know who's going to win these games. So why not make a little bit of money on that expertise, and why not give yourself a better reason, more enjoyable reason to watch and be a part of all the action? So go to BetUS.com. That's America's most beloved sports book. You don't get to be that way as long as they have been now for more than 25 years, unless you're taking good care of your players. That's what BetUS.com will do. In fact, when you use the promo code SEC125, that's SEC125, BetUS is going to give you 125% sign-up bonus. That means they are literally going to put more money in your account to start than you put in there. You put in $100, they'll put in $125. You've got $225. That means you're a winner before you make your first bet. But you've got to use the promo code SEC125. BetUS.com for more on that. SEC125, the promo code to use to get the 125% sign-up bonus. All right. So as Georgia moves on as national champion, Alabama moves on as SEC champion and national runner-up, all attention starts being turned now to what's going to happen in 2022, especially in light of the NFL draft exodus that's just taken place. We've reached the deadline to declare for the NFL draft. CBSSports.com had a very interesting piece up about which teams were hurt the most by this, impacted the most by this. I want to run through. Shayan Jayarajah is the author here, former colleague of ours here at SEC Country, and I want to give you the SEC names that show up on this list. First of all, number one on the list right now is the Texas A&M Aggies. Kenyon Green, DeMarvin Neal, Jalen Watermeyer, the tight end, Isaiah Spiller, the running back, all get mentioned here. And I do think in 2022, we're talking about a very interesting setup on its way for Texas A&M. This is a program that has now very famously had the number one recruiting class in America, also bringing in a big transfer, a quarterback like Max Johnson, on the heels of what actually turned out to be a pretty disappointing year for the Aggies on the field. Did not build on the top 5 finish of 2020 very well here in 2021, but the hope is that 2022 is the time in which all this talent comes together. At least that's what the folks in College Station are hoping. How true is that really going to be? Well, I think replacing some of the guys that just got mentioned there, departures to this program, going to be a big story. We'll be watching that a lot as you head towards the 2022 season. Georgia comes in at number 4 on this list, obviously losing guys like Nakobe Dean, Trayvon Walker, George Pickens, some of the guys that are gone there. And for the most part, Georgia's not really all that different than any national champion. Ole Miss comes in at number 6. Obviously, the most important name there is what happens with Matt Corral. Ole Miss now in the business of having to break in a brand new quarterback. We'll see how well Lane Kiffin handles all of that. Alabama at 8 on this list from CBS Sports. The truth is they do lose a lot, but they bring back probably the top returning offensive and defensive player in the league for next season. Will Anderson on defense, of course. Bryce Young, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Alabama's no newcomer when it comes to having to break in new talent each and every year, but according to CBS Sports, one of the 10 most impacted teams by NFL draft departures. You can read more about that at cbssports.com, and that's probably worth paying a little bit of attention to. Also, something else worth watching. Obviously, teams at the top of the league we just mentioned a moment ago having to figure out what's going to happen with the talent they've lost. But for some other up-and-coming teams, holding on to what they have is also a very big deal here. And one of the surprise teams in the SEC in 2021 was Sam Pittman's Arkansas Razorbacks, following up on what was really a pretty good debut season for Pittman. Kind of an unlikely story, becoming head coach there in Fayetteville, winning more games than were thought in 2020, and then capitalizing on that in a big way there in 2021 there as well. And obviously, hopes are even better and higher for more success in 2022, especially with the way that which Arkansas has already utilized the transfer portal, bringing in guys like former Oklahoma wide receiver Jaden Hazelwood as a for instance on that. But one of the secrets to Arkansas' success under Pittman has been quality coordinators. A year ago, it was the ability to hold on to Barry Odom, keeping him from taking big bucks to go become Texas defensive coordinator that paid dividends. And here now, a year later, in a different offseason, Arkansas seems to be finding themselves fighting to keep a coordinator again. Now, this time it's Kendall Briles. There are rumors out there that Briles could be on his way to becoming Miami offensive coordinator. There has been some reporting in the last 24 hours, though, that maybe that's not exactly where all this is heading. Let me show you this from a guy who runs and writes for the Arkansas SB Nation site. His name's Jacob Davis. He's got a blue check, so we'll take him serious at least on that standpoint, saying that I've been told that Kendall Briles has turned down the offer to be offensive coordinator at Miami, and he's going to stay at Arkansas. We'll see if anybody else follows up and offers similar reporting on that, but there seems to be some disagreement on the Miami side about whether or not Briles was even offered this job to begin with. And frankly, while this is not SEC related, it's kind of worth pointing out that Miami has seemingly had a hard time finding an offensive coordinator. Obviously, new head coach Mario Cristobal, one of the things that plagued his time there in Eugene as head coach at Oregon was the inability to find a great OC. Joe Moorhead turned out not to be that guy. Prior to that, Oregon was even worse offensively. Even, when having a great future NFL quarterback, for the most part, that just didn't spell success for the Ducks during the Cristobal era. Coming to Miami, getting a good offensive coordinator is going to be crucial, but a lot of the names that we first heard potentially connected to this, Joe Brady, former LSU pass game coordinator, now Kendall Briles, Toledo head coach, all kinds of names have been kind of mentioned as potential offensive coordinators there. They're actually just not really coming to fruition all that much. So it sounds like a lot of the Miami folks are trying to say, well, you never even offered the job to Kendall Briles. Briles, if so, would not be the first guy to leverage potential interest to get himself more money. But regardless of what the actual truth here is, if this results in Briles staying at Arkansas to be with the Razorbacks here for 2022, I think that becomes a pretty big win there for the Hogs, being able to hold on to a head coach there. We're going to get more of your comments, I should say more of the news around the SEC coming up here in just a little bit. For now, though, let me pop over and get some YouTube comments. Haven't done very many of those here today. We'll kind of find out what's going on there. Bo Molinari says that the name, image, likeness stuff has been good for the Aggies. We mentioned that about Texas A&M a moment ago. Impacted by a lot of NFL draft departures, obviously number one recruiting class. Bo, the Aggies fan in our YouTube comment section, crediting some of that to the name, image, likeness stuff. He says that A&M's been buying teams since the 1970s, and there was obviously a story that came out this week about Eric Dickerson being offered a Trans Am by A&M back in the day or something like that, so that's actually kind of been in the news here as of late. So obviously Bo feeling pretty good about the number one class that Texas A&M has put together for the upcoming year. Cindy OG, great to see you in the comment section. George, a Florida fan, weighing in on this, saying it's legal to buy players now, and obviously we do live in a name, image, likeness era now. I think and we talked about this in the show, I think it was last week, that I still think there's an opportunity to kind of understand what is actually going on here. You know, what is the reality of name, image, likeness, and how much money is it that's going into the hands of players right now? We hear a lot of what I believe are exaggerated claims, unverified claims. But what is the actual real truth related to some of this for A&M or any other team around college football? At some point in time, I hope we get more specifics on that. But pretty clearly, we're in kind of that world now. Darian Ford says, I think this is going to be the final nail with Texas A&M. Been there a minute, no success. Now this class, Jimbo's seat's going to get hot. Look, I mean, I think that Jimbo Fisher has done well by himself with how well he's recruited. It's one of the reasons why I don't kind of get all that up in arms about the number one class that A&M put together this year. Some people say, well, it could have only happened because of name, image, likeness revenue for the players. But the honest truth is A&M was very close to a top-flight elite class in the 2021 cycle. Going to where it was, that sort of top five-ish type range to number one now, is actually not that big of a leap. I don't really put all that much on the fact that A&M made the jump that it did this year. It's got early playing time to offer players. It's in a talent-rich state. Jimbo Fisher's been a good recruiter. I don't know that there's anything really all that peculiar about the way in which Texas A&M has put this recruiting class together. But obviously, when you have that success, and for the most part, you haven't really put on-field success together to match it, there is going to be a challenge now on Jimbo to win more, find the quarterback that as of yet he hasn't really found. There's no doubt that the pressure ratchets up a little bit, and the SEC West remains a pretty deep division all the way around. Bo Molinari, the A&M fan, does come back to say that he believes that A&M is going to be scary good in the next couple of years, and that could very well be true. G. Grace, Bama boy, an Alabama fan, weighing in on this to say that Jimbo is a great recruiter. Unfortunately for him, Saban's going to dismantle A&M this fall, and the Jimbo is overrated talk will resume. Well, obviously that'll be a revenge game for Alabama there, given the fact that A&M won that contest back this past season. Senio also checking in to say that A&M is going to have the same narrative as us, the Georgia Bulldogs, do this year. Senio's being a UGA fan. He says, national championship or bust, just my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that for Georgia it was ever national championship or bust this past year. Clearly some folks tried to make it be that way, media members in particular, nor do I think it's necessarily national championship or bust for Texas A&M coming up this upcoming year. Their odds to do so will be lower than both Georgia and Alabama, at least in the SEC, but showing more on-field results, winning more games convincingly, because if you want to go back to the 2020 season when A&M actually broke through in a big way, finished the year in the top five, I think they deserve more consideration in the college football playoff than it got. The one thing, even in that successful year that A&M didn't really do quite so much, they weren't really winning games convincingly. So one of the things that A&M can prove itself as in terms of what it does on the field in 2022, more convincing wins against teams other than Alabama, more wins against good teams in particular. I believe Alabama was the only team with a winning record that A&M beat all season long, and also just making a step to being more of a contender in the SEC West race. A&M had a chance to do that this past year and drop some games that kind of removed itself from contender status. Those are the kinds of things you need to see in terms of progress this upcoming season. And absent that, then it will be fair to criticize Jimbo Fisher a bit. Back over on Facebook here just for a moment. Let's find out what folks are saying. Trey Droughty kind of weighing in here with Alex Dulé, who kind of gives you the Hail State. Trey Droughty shouting out Justin Robinson, former Georgia wide receiver, now on his way to Mississippi State. And Alex is in here celebrating his Mississippi State team. Michael Setzer, going back to a topic from earlier in the show, saying, remember a few years ago when Saban marched with protesters, he says the Gumps didn't like that one bit. Then he won another national championship. No one cared. Now he's for a new political issue, and folks are going to go crazy. I guess it's okay for people to give their opinion all day long. He says, but he can't because he's a coach. I just think it comes down to, certain jobs are about doing the job. And if you want the best chance at success at your job, eliminating potential distractions, especially distractions that you cause, I think are a big part of that. And in the case of Nick Saban, that may be the case here. Let's get some more comments here on Facebook if I can kind of scroll up and get a few more of these. All right, on Facebook. Sean Smith checks in to give you a hottie toddy. We talked a little Ole Miss a little earlier. You got both Alex and Sean weighing in on behalf of the two schools in the Magnolia State, so SEC fans having their voice heard here right now. Steve Schaffini weighing in. He's a Georgia fan on the confidence that he felt about Georgia getting over the hump against Alabama. Yeah, I think that for a lot of Georgia fans, it was one of those things they had to believe. They had to see to be able to believe. And maybe until the late stage of that game, maybe they couldn't really convince themselves that was true. I certainly know I rode a roller coaster of emotions about all of that. A lot of Georgia fans did there as well. Danny Sanchez over here touting Sam Pittman as SEC Coach of the Year. I think that few were better for sure. Few were absolutely better on all of that. Tammy Sellers weighing in on the political topic that Nick Saban kind of weighed in on there too. And that's the problem, is all of a sudden now Saban's name kind of generates these opinions. And at a certain point in time, Nick Saban's going to want to exit himself in this conversation, but volunteering yourself into that fray makes exiting much later much more difficult to do. Brian Lowe says, there are 12 other teams in the SEC, and all you guys ever talk about is what Georgia and Alabama are doing, and now what's going on in the NFL. So we gave you a little A&M a moment ago, and we're going to finish the show. We gave you a good bit of Arkansas a moment ago. So, Brian, I'm not sure which team you're a fan of. We gave you some Arkansas. I'm going to finish with some Tennessee and some South Carolina. I got some Auburn coming up. So I feel unfairly maligned. Yes, we have talked a lot about Alabama and Georgia, but they've also been quite successful. But, Brian, we gave you a good bit of Arkansas. I got some more coming for you here in just a little bit from some of the other teams around the league. Let's see what else. Orrin Chile bringing up the subject of tampering the transfer portal. Here's one of the things I think is really, a major concern. That ultimately, if you ask, the top coaches in the SEC, what bothers you more? Is it transfer portal? Is it name, image, likeness? Coaches are going to be more bothered by the transfer portal than they're going to be bothered by the name, image, likeness stuff. That's just the biggest threat to the stability in college football, I personally believe. And I think as Orrin points out here, the one thing we have to decide is there going to be any desire whatsoever to enforce rules related to the transfer portal and the idea that there are guys that are exiting these SEC rosters, they're finding a new home almost instantaneously, which would lead you to believe that maybe they had contact with another school before they actually officially entered into the transfer portal. And nobody seems to care about that right now. But at a certain point in time, when it's the bigger schools who are taking from the smaller schools, all of a sudden the fact that people ignored this aspect of the rule book, I'm guessing at that point, a lot of this is going to seem a little bit more relevant at the time. And right now, that's just not really being thought of or taken care of. But I do believe that Orrin's right about that. That at a certain point, paying more attention to the way in which some guys seem to be being tampered with while they're on somebody else's roster, I do believe that's probably worth paying attention to. I think that Orrin's probably right about that. By the way, Steve Highland also weighing in on his pick for the NFL. He likes the Rams and the points coming up, so good stuff from Steve there on that. Tony Williams kind of enjoying an LSU offseason, saying, I'm looking forward to the upcoming year and just happy not to have Ed Orgeron after the debacle of 2020 and 2021. Yeah, how quickly things change when it comes to that national championship in 2019, but a far cry from that in 2020 and 2021. And now the Brian Kelly era is upon us. So we'll have more conversation on that in the comments section, hopefully before we're done. Let me get a couple of more stories, and for somebody who said we talk too much Bama and too much Georgia, here are a couple of non-Bama and Georgia-related stories for you. I thought it was very interesting to see Auburn add another transfer quarterback. This is Robbie Ashford, this time coming over from Oregon. I'll show you the announcement from Ashford on the screen. Obviously, Ashford originally from Hoover, Alabama, part of a very successful Buccaneers program, former 2020 signee, had been in Oregon, been injured, banged up, and now coming back to Auburn. And let me tell you what I think is interesting about this. First of all, I've always sort of felt like Ashford was kind of an interesting prospect. But in addition to that, this is another transfer this Auburn program has added. Remember, it's TJ Finley from LSU a year ago. Then it was Zach Calzada from Texas A&M the other day, and now it's Robbie Ashford there as well. And you kind of wonder if this blueprint that Auburn seems to be going through here is going to be a little bit of a template that other programs choose to use there as well, where we go from the days of bringing in the big name transfer where that's going to be the starting quarterback, to all of a sudden now you bringing in a handful of transfers where you kind of throw them out there in a competition and let the best man win. And if this is what we're moving into, where teams like Auburn that have resources and kind of stands out as an attractive destination to a lot of players, especially a guy like Ashford who has a chance to come back towards home. If this is the way that things are going to be going here in the future, then a lot of players who are using their one-time transfer are going to end up wasting it. In the case of Finley, and who's obviously already been here for a while and played some, but Finley and Calzada, who leaves A&M because it seems like he was not destined to be the starter there, all of a sudden with him and Ashford and a handful of other quarterbacks here in place there in Auburn, Calzada would appear to be not really guaranteed anything at Auburn either. And so you kind of wonder, what impact is this going to have on players who use that one-time transfer pretty quickly and yet move into a situation where they're really no better guaranteed of playing time than they had before they left. All of this is pretty interesting, I think, for Auburn, both in terms of what it might mean for other programs chasing down multiple transfer quarterbacks in a given year, and also for a guy in Brian Harsin, who I don't think ingrained himself into his community as well as Sam Pittman did over the course of his first couple of years at Arkansas, as well as maybe Lane Kiffin did at Ole Miss. Obviously, Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer, who we're going to talk about in a moment. It seems like for right now, it's been a little slower embrace of Brian Harsin by the Auburn community. He needs to be good in 2022, and having a capable starting quarterback with Bo Nix now at Auburn would seem to be a very important part of that equation, and it seems like Auburn's turning to multiple quarterbacks with a chance of being able to get that done. By the way, speaking of other first-year coaches around the SEC, let's congratulate a couple here right now as SEC Country Live rolls on. Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer shared the award by the Football Writers Association of America as the Steve Spurrier Award, which goes to the top coach in his first year around the country, and Heupel and Beamer shared that award here for 2021. I was going to play some Shane Beamer audio for you, but my thing messed up, my recorder messed up, so I don't have the Beamer audio to play you. But I do have some Josh Heupel audio to play you of the ceremony the other night. You actually saw this on the SEC Country video channels the other night. But Heupel talking about the challenge of what he inherited at Tennessee compared to what he also took over at UCF when that team had been undefeated the year before he got there. The situation around Tennessee far different from that, and Josh Heupel this week with the Football Writers Association of America talked about the challenge he faced along the way to a successful first year there with the Vols. This is Josh Heupel.
I think the challenge were two completely different things as far as the program and what they had experienced the season before. Every time you take over a new program, there's going to be a different challenge. And that's just, where you're at, where you're recruiting, who's inside of the building, and what are the challenges or successes that they've had the previous year. And coming to Tennessee, obviously there was a lot of outside noise. We were able to quiet the storm, quiet the chatter. Our kids bought in immediately into what we're doing. They understood that the connection and accountability were going to be extremely important in the success that we were going to have. We never placed a ceiling in what our players inside of the program could do. We believed that there were great players inside of it. They bought into it, and they worked extremely hard. And as well as we played at times last year, we were disappointed when the outcome wasn't what we wanted because we knew we had enough to go win on those days. Excited about the future, what we've been able to do in year one, but what we're able to build upon here as we get started in year two when our kids get back to campus.
G. Grace, Bama Boy over here on YouTube says the Tennessee team that Josh Heupel just spoke about is going to be a problem if the defense can come around. He says it's just like Ole Miss. If they get it together, watch out. And I do think that obviously Heupel does have a lot to be proud of in his first year there. A lot of that did happen on offense. Honestly, given the overall lack of talent, dearth of even roster spots occupied after so many departures at the end of the Jeremy Pruitt era, Tennessee was actually a little bit better defensively this past season than I expected them to be. But ultimately, G. Grace is right that they are a defense away from being a real problem for a lot of teams around the SEC, at least potentially, and Heupel obviously deserves a lot of credit for that. Brent Hickman also checks in on YouTube to say that there were a lot of SEC teams that checked out once they were out of the playoff contention, that teams like Arkansas and South Carolina stayed focused and stayed basically motivated, and that's another reason why Shane Beamer joined Josh Heupel in winning that Football Writers Association of America First-Year Coaches Award. And I do think that Beamer, much like Heupel, had a very successful year. I told you before I was going to play some Beamer audio, and it just kind of messed up on me. Wasn't able to do that. But I think that Shane puts himself to really build something at South Carolina that starts to look pretty interesting. And all of a sudden now, you look at an SEC East that has a well-established Georgia. Mark Stoops kind of is what he is. Actually quietly put together a pretty good year there in Lexington once again. Right now, Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida, all with relatively new coaches. Heupel and Beamer going into their second season. Billy Napier going into his first season there at Florida. Expectations pretty high there in Gainesville right now. You're left to wonder if the collection of talent from a coaching standpoint now in the SEC East finally gives this division a chance to kind of balance the overall power in the SEC. And the SEC is a conference all the way around. The West has had the imbalance in favor of it now for quite some time. Coaches like Beamer on the rise, Heupel on the rise, if they indeed are, Napier coming up in his first year. Can they help restore some of this balance and kind of even things out amongst the two divisions again? It'll be worth watching. But pretty clearly, both Heupel and Beamer were better in their first season than most of us probably thought they would be, and they do deserve to pat themselves in the back for that here at least a little bit. Of course, here on SEC Country Live, we join you each and every Wednesday. We talk about everything that's happening around the SEC. Your comments are always a fun part of that. Thank you for weighing in here on Facebook and on YouTube there as well. SEC Country on Facebook, SEC Country Live on YouTube. We certainly appreciate that. As I told you off the very top of our program today, we do have big things in store for you for the upcoming year. Can't wait to tell you about all of that. And we will also continue to try to have some fun with you when possible, especially when we close out the show. We always kind of end the show on kind of a lighthearted note. Always fun for us to be able to do that. We call that the SEC LOL, and at risk of talking more about Georgia and Alabama, I thought it was very funny. There's a popular restaurant that a lot of you around SEC country enjoy called Raising Cane's. A lot of them in Louisiana. There's one in Athens, Georgia, some different places. A lot of you really enjoy that. Stetson Bennett, I guess, has signed a name, image, likeness deal with Raising Cane's, and in a recent appearance over at Cane's, had a pretty funny response when it came time to give somebody the price for their order. He was kind of standing in the drive-through, a part of that. Raising Cane's put this on YouTube. Put this on TikTok. Other folks have shared this. Let me show you on the screen here. Stetson Bennett with the with the drive-through radio headset on, saying that'll be $33.18 there at Raising Cane's. A Caniac ambassador for Raising Cane's, and of course 33-18, the final score for Georgia over Alabama in the national championship game. And obviously Stetson Bennett a big part of bringing that national title home to UGA and enjoying that there as he has some fun at the expense of the Alabama Crimson Tide, while also making himself a little endorsement money there with Raising Cane's. So pretty funny stuff. That is our SEC LOL for today. Thank all of you for being with us here today for SEC Country Live every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Facebook and YouTube. We'll join you again next week. We'll talk more about this league as it gets ready for 2022, the finishing touches on the 2022 signing class, spring practice around the corner. Be here before you know it. We will cover it all with you, and we'll see you then right here on SEC Country Live.